We've been looking at the recent developments around the summit preparations between China and the EU, and it's quite a tangled web, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, it's definitely a layered situation. What stands out to me is the intersection of trade diplomacy and military alliances, right?
Exactly. It's like on one side, you've got the long standing trade issues, accusations that China is distorting market practices, and on the other, there's this NATO stance that seems to be complicating the EU China summit. It creates a kind of double edged challenge.
Right. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, pointedly criticized China for supposedly limiting market access by distorting trade, which China's own foreign and commerce ministries dismiss as misrepresentation.
Yes, and what's really fascinating is how this dispute isn't just about trade policies. It's interwoven with strategic alignments. NATO is clearly leaning into a more confrontational posture toward China just when the summit is set to begin.
That is interesting, because you might expect the summit to be a setting for easing tensions, but instead, the military alliance's position is adding another layer of complexity.
Exactly. It kind of
Yeah,
feels like the traditional notions of economic partnership and security alliances are colliding. I mean, think about it. You have high level diplomacy and trade in one arena and a confrontational NATO stance in another, all at the same time.
and it makes you wonder which narrative will dominate. Is it trade, which has intrinsic tie ins with both sides, or security and the broader alignment with US policies?
Yes, and this brings us to another key point: the impact of US tariff policies. The US seems to be sending its own signals that might influence or even shape the future of China EU trade relations. It's almost like the US is playing chess on multiple boards.
Exactly. It's reminiscent of a scenario where one move in the security arena can create ripple effects in the economic domain. And honestly, wouldn't you say that this multi layered dynamic might even be overblown by some?
Well, I think that's where the respectful critiques come in. Some analysts might argue that the focus on NATO's stance is a distraction from deeper structural issues in the trade relationship. But clearly, the fact that influential figures, like for example the NATO chief, adopt a confrontational tone just adds an extra layer of pressure.
I see what you mean. But isn't it also possible that NATO's stance is, in fact, quite relevant now? I mean, security and economics have always been intertwined, and perhaps NATO's position is intended to be a signal of strategic unity rather than just a distraction.
That's a fair point. It's almost like they're trying to, remind everyone that global trade doesn't take place in a vacuum, that there are geopolitical considerations at play. And you can see that with the way both sides are framing their arguments.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the role of the experts involved. We've got perspectives from scholars like Victor Gaujikai, Pascal Coppens, and Professor Glenn Deason. Their insights add a nuanced layer to the conversation about how innovation and strategic interest maneuver in this environment.
Right. These experts highlight that while trade is a significant factor, we must also consider how strategic alignments and technological innovation are affecting these discussions. For example, Pascal Coppens often emphasizes that Chinese innovation has become a critical front in these tensions. It's not just economics, it's also about technology and national pride.
Yes, and that's such an interesting angle. It suggests that even if both parties are making progress in bilateral trade talks, these underlying disputes, whether they're about market access or military posturing, can derail any meaningful progress.
Exactly. It's like there's an unspoken acknowledgement that trade and security are inseparable. And let's be honest, the timing couldn't be more challenging with the upcoming EU China summit. If the NATO chief's confrontational stance escalates the tension, it might hinder any diplomatic breakthroughs during the summit.
That's precisely the dilemma. You could say it's a classic case of mixed signals. While both sides seem ready to engage in dialogue over economic issues, the external pressures from military alliances are muddying the waters.
Exactly. And that's where US tariff policies come into play too. The tariffs are not just numbers on a trade bill, they're also political statements. They signal, in a way, how the US is positioning itself in this global
Right.
reshuffle. They're more than economic tools, they're diplomatic signals.
And sometimes those signals can have unintended consequences. I mean, if the tariffs end up significantly impacting the trade balance, or, even worse, If they lead to a tit-for-tat that escalates further, wouldn't it potentially push both China and the EU into more defensive stances?
Yes, exactly. It becomes a high stakes balancing act. On one side, you have the urge to stand firm against trade practices that are, according to von der Leyen, unfair. On the other, the broader geopolitical alliances, like NATO and the US's role, are pushing for a tougher stance overall on China. It's a bit like walking a tightrope without a safety net.
That's a striking analogy. And when you're dealing with such high stakes, it begs the question, is there still room for constructive dialogue among these players, or are we heading toward more entrenched positions?
It seems to me that while the trade talks have their own momentum, with progress noted by some diplomatic exchanges, the larger questions about strategic posture and security alliances are starting to dominate public discourse. And frankly, that can derail even the best laid plans for economic cooperation. It's like one
Yeah,
misstep can tip the whole balance off.
I agree, and it makes you wonder how the summit will tackle these multi-layered issues. Is there any indication of, say, a roadmap or some sort of compromise framework that can handle both the trade and security dimensions?
Well, the discussion suggests that there's an ongoing effort to reconcile these differences, but it's not exactly clear how open each side is to adjusting its strategic posture. The Chinese government, for instance, rejects accusations of unfair practices, insisting that these claims ignore progress in bilateral dialogues.
And that's where we get this clash of narratives. On one hand, the EU is trying to advocate for more balanced trade, especially with von der Leyen's criticism coming in hot. On the other, China is pushing back, emphasizing cooperation and progress.
Right, and then you add in the NATO factor, with a chief who's openly adopting a confrontational stance towards China. It sends mixed messages, to be honest. It's like shouting one thing during a summit while whispering another behind closed doors. That kind of inconsistency is bound to create friction.
I have to wonder though, isn't that sometimes a calculated move? I mean, could the confrontational NATO stance be a bargaining chip in negotiations rather than just a rigid policy?
That's a sharp observation. It could be seen as a way of leveraging pressure on multiple fronts. But while that might work in some diplomatic plays, it also risks alienating the very partners you need to negotiate with, particularly when you're juggling sensitive trade talks. It's a tricky
Right.
balance.
It does sound like a strategic minefield. And do we have any insights into how this might affect the underlying trade policies in the long term?
Well, one perspective is that if the US tariffs continue or even escalate, it might force both China and the EU to reassess their strategies. Trade will no longer be a neutral ground. It'll be a barometer for strategic confidence on both sides. It essentially forces them to choose sides more clearly.
And that, conceptually at least, could crystallize the alliances further in a way that might limit future cooperation on trade. But on the flip side, if there's a mutually recognized need to avoid a full-blown conflict, maybe there's still a window for finding common ground.
That's the million-dollar question. Or, well, the multi-billion-dollar question, given the stakes at hand. Both sides have reasons to maintain the dialogue, despite, or perhaps because of, these tensions. Avoiding escalation is, after all, in everyone's best interest.
True. But I do wonder if the insistence on confronting these issues head-on through public statements and tariffs might, paradoxically, be counterproductive. It seems like every harsh signal narrows the room for compromise. Wouldn't you agree?
I can see that argument, and it's a valid point. The more each side entrench its position, the harder it is to steer the conversation toward common interests. Yet, some might argue that bold stances are necessary to reset the playing field and force genuine negotiations. It's a classic debate of tough love versus conciliatory diplomacy.
Precisely, and the stakes here are enormous, not just for bilateral trade, but for global economic stability and strategic alignments. It's almost like we're witnessing a modern chess match where every move is critically scrutinized.
Absolutely. And if we zoom out a bit, the broader implications are clear. The intertwining of trade and security in today's world means that isolated decisions, like imposing tariffs or making a bold NATO statement, have far-reaching consequences.
Yeah,
It's all part of a larger strategic dance.
well put. And looking ahead, the key will be whether diplomatic leaders can navigate this maze effectively, balancing tough rhetoric with the need for actual productive dialogue. Otherwise, both economic and security outcomes might suffer.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that while trade discussions can sometimes seem like dry negotiations over numbers, they're deeply connected to national pride, technological competition, and strategic security. Every decision is multidimensional.
And in that complexity lies both the challenge and the opportunity. If they can, you know, find a way to align their interests, even in the midst of confrontation, it might just pave the way for a new era in international diplomacy.
Well, here's hoping that the upcoming summit, despite these tensions, can serve as a platform for laying down some common ground. It's definitely something to watch closely as it unfolds, definitely something to keep our eyes on.
For sure. And it just goes to show how intertwined trade, technology, and geopolitical strategy have become. It's not just about commerce anymore, it's about shaping the future global order.
Absolutely. And while the stakes are incredibly high, it's also an opportunity for all parties to innovate both diplomatically and economically. The challenge is real, but so is the potential for transformative change. Exactly the kind of dynamic we need in today's world.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the intricate interplay of trade and security at a time when every decision is charged with political significance. Thanks for the insightful discussion.
Thank you. It's been a lively conversation indeed, and one that reminds us that global affairs, with all their stumbles and bold moves, are as complex as they are critical.